This is the Gauntlet, episode 122. I'm Rich.
I'm Rach.
And I'm Lowell this time.
Hey everybody, it is another Games Roundup episode. We are going to talk about games we've played. It has been since late September since we had a Games Roundup, so quite a few games will be mentioned here, I'm pretty sure. This will be the maybe last of the year, possibly last Games Roundup that we have. We'll see. We'll see what 2018 holds.
Don't jinx us, man.
Jinx you. Okay, well.
Hey, you gotta keep your gaming schedule going through the holidays. It's what the hardcore gamers do, right?
No, well, usually during December, we have a few less podcasts. We kind of ramp down on games, spend time with friends, family, holidays type stuff. In fact, I think there was someone on the Slack complaining that there was nothing on the calendar for 2 days right after basically American Thanksgiving. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of American Thanksgiving. Like, not everyone. But now there's going to be games on that day, I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
Well, there's some non-Americans on the Slack, right?
True.
They should have been picking up the slack. That's all I'm saying.
Hey,
January,
my
slack.
friends.
All right, well, let's kick it off. The games that I've played since last we recorded: Pig Smoke, Velvet Glove, Worldwide Wrestling, Monster Hearts 2, Lacuna Part 1, Spirit of 77, Apocalypse World 2nd Edition, Changeling the Lost, the PBTA hack from Lowell, 7th Sea Katai. Is that how you say it? Katai? Is that how you're saying it?
That's the way
Lowell?
I'm saying it.
Cool. It's probably way wrong. Familiars, 2nd Edition, Legend of the Elements, Masks, A New Generation, and Bedlam Hall. And then the game that I'm going to discuss, which is The Hood. The Hood is an Apocalypse World hack it's an Apocalypse World 1st Edition hack, because it's been out for a bit. It's for modern day small time crime, written by James Mullen of Groundhoggeth Games. You know, I normally don't call PBTA games hacks, but James openly says so. And it's interesting too, because there are bloody fingerprints of Apocalypse World throughout, which I love.
And it is one of the really early ones, right?
It is pretty early. I mean, yeah. I have the director's edition that is more recent. I think it came out in 2014.
What color's the cover?
It is red. It started off blue and red's the newer one. Yeah, so well, maybe it wasn't 2014. It's more recent. 2015, maybe more like that. It is one of the earlier ones. What's interesting, the agendas are mostly the same from Apocalypse World. In fact, the names list is like Apocalypse World names with some really cool names like added after, slightly before, but like right in the middle is Shaza and Rothschild and Balls. And I'm like, I love those names.
Totally buy that for a crime-centered game, though.
Yeah, there's some great little names. I mean, why not? Why not? The things that worked for me with The Hood is that you don't directly get experience points. There are other economies that drive experience points. So there's still 5 XP and you buy a new move or take an advancement. But the cycle to get experience is generated by heat, and heat comes from failures or when trouble comes your way. So you really have to put yourself at risk in order to earn experience points. And I was talking with Jason Cox after the 3rd session of the game I've been running for Saturday Morning Cartoons, and he found it really interesting that you can also get XP through debt, which is the replacement for HX. So the relationship mechanic is generating debt with other people, and then you resolve that debt. Once you have debt with somebody, you owe them some payback. And then once you resolve that and you take that debt all the way up, and then it will cycle out. After 3, you'll get an experience point and you reset. You guys are square. So it rewards you for amping up the pressure with the police, with other members of organized crime, with your own people, friends, and family. You can actually get heat and try to rely on them, and they may not let you lie low because you're rolling with heat if you fail. And then you can get experience points by doing things with other characters, which is really smart. I like that design. It's interesting to see how heat cycles through the game, because I mean is this mechanic that's a really easy abstracted way to say trouble is coming your way. And by looking at that heat rating, it's an easy justification. It's almost like it's like the 6-, right? You know that a hard move is coming. With heat, it's a little more than that, right? Because it's not just one move that's come your way. You've had 3, 4 heat come your way. And so you can really ratchet up the pressure there.
How is that tracked? Is it like a heat for each organization, or is it a group heat?
No, it's just generalized heat.
Okay.
It's just trouble. You're making noise and someone's going to come bite at you. And as the MC, I'm tracking all the people that you owe payback to and the people that you've pissed off. And I will use one of them as appropriate in the fiction to deliver.
So is heat generalized to the whole party, or is it specific to characters?
It is specific to characters, and it is just one track. So you don't have heat with the mafia, heat with the cops. You have heat.
Okay.
Yeah, and as you have heat, right, as it gets up, you can get in tons of trouble. You can get arrested. You can get whacked. So you want to knock that heat off. You don't want to max out your heat. Heat pushes experience points. Heat is, I kind of think of it like Grand Theft Auto, like you have the little star rating, right? And all the cops are coming, and all of a sudden it's the helicopters. Like as you get so many stars, it gets worse and worse and worse for you. And so you'll take that heat, and there's a move where you can actually pass the heat off to other player characters. You can lay low, which means you have to roll with your heat. So the higher the heat, the harder it is. But with a success, you can get some help from your friends and family and lay low for a bit and then bleed off some of that heat. So it's got a neat economy series of moves built up around it. It's not just a bolt on, which is what I kind of thought it was when I first looked at it. My favorite part of the Hood, and it's called the Hood, so you would hope that this would be good, is the creation of the neighborhood. It takes maybe, like if you really want to push it at a con, it would probably take maybe 15 minutes. We spent about half an hour, but the end result of it is it set up all of our play. It allows each player to have a buy-in to create streets and things that are on each of the streets, houses, buildings, areas that they will utilize for resources. And I thought this was super clever because I haven't seen this anywhere else. You get to the end and you say, all right, well, what's not here? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you don't have a hospital. Oh, you don't have like a food market. And so these are things that you have to leave the Hood to go get, which I love because then it creates these series of needs and wants, but it also colors what your neighborhood is about.
Pretty portable to other games that would be using like a restrained area.
Definitely. It is dirt simple and really sharp because the way it goes around in turns, it has just a few phases. It is not we're going to hex crawl this whole thing out. You start off with a main road. Some people are going to add some places where they live. They're going to add some places where they work or are interesting to them. You add a few more places. Then you see what's missing. And you're done. Like I said, it could be 15 minutes if you really kind of ratchet it up and push people. But if you tell a few stories along the way, if you guys enjoy the world creation as part of your play, you absolutely make a lot of interesting stories that already exist. Like you're creating fiction. Not quite microscope, but you can do that kind of stuff. That's pretty great.
Is the lack of various pieces of infrastructure addressed in the neighborhood building process? Because you talked about, you build all these things, you realize you don't have a hospital, or you accidentally built a food desert. Does the game expect you to accidentally fall into that trap? Or is there mechanics in place to say, yes, you have these things that service your criminal background, but not the social parts of your community?
So yes and no. So what it does is there are only 3 phases and each person gets a choice. There's no way you're going to cover everything. And it's not built to structure to say, well, you got to have a police department.
Yeah.
So it assumes that there are going to be things that are missing. And you as a group discuss what's missing that's important and noteworthy that we feel like you guys need. And I think that's smart because it's not you don't have to create this laundry list. You don't have to be a city planner. My God, I'm not a city planner. But as a group, we could say, hey, I noticed that there's no school of higher learning. And you mentioned that this character is going to college. Well, that is important. So let's have that as part and parcel, and ended up somebody wanted to try to go to the university and sell some drugs. It was hilarious. Fronts are really interesting and simple. You take a target inside the hood, something that people have already created, so they have some buy-in. You figure out why it has a value, and there are some lists kind of similar to like fronts in Dungeon World and, of course, Apocalypse World, where this got its inspiration. You come up with a base outside of the hood that is targeting that particular place that you've chosen within the hood. And that's it. Like you create some story around that. And I love it because it does that outside versus inside, and it creates the idea of opposition. Like, okay, I may not love you, but I love this neighborhood. This is where I live. This is where I eat. So we're going to defend our hood. Like it matters to us. It really enriched our play by utilizing that front procedure. I liked it a lot. So there are some things I'm not too sure about. The first one is this is the director's edition. So it was released a couple years after the first. And James had a lot of thoughts. There are 27 playbooks.
Holy crap.
Spit take.
In the director's edition. Yeah. 27 playbooks. And the differences between some of them are huge, and some of them are not that huge. And it's just an abundance of choice. Like, if I were to do it over again, I would probably just cull it down to like 8 playbooks, because that's just in the Gauntlet method of we're going to play for 3 hours. We're going to play 4 or 5 sessions. That doesn't work. Like, I gave it out to the players ahead of time. Luckily, I had a really sharp group of players that did some conversation before we got in, and we were able to work around that. But if I'd had new people who weren't really savvy with PBTA, that could have taken a whole session. And so that's just a thing to do with the Gauntlet. Because if you look at Dungeon World, right, there are more than 27 playbooks. If you look all across, like, go to Drive-Thru-RPG and just search under Dungeon World, like, there are hundreds maybe. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's something that in the book, just be advised, you may want to go in and kind of highlight, here are a few, or even do the thing of like you're the taste tester person. Like, what is it that you like to play? Okay, cool. Here are these 3 playbooks that you might want to look at. The hardest part about the hood for me, and I still haven't reached the level of mastery with this at all, is that so first I come in and it's an Apocalypse World hack, and here's the Apocalypse World agendas, and here's some names in the name list. And so I'm expecting that, but it's not that. The place where the moves intersect with the play at the table is radically different from Apocalypse World, from Monster Hearts, or Urban Shadows. I come in thinking that you're going to go in, you mix some stuff up, and you get a little bit of heat out of it, that we're going to have moves that are within the fiction of committing the crime. That's not the case. It is really wanting you to say, I'm committing to do this crime, and let's see what the fallout is. Like, there are very few moves that deal with the nitty-gritty of sneaking around. There are no moves for observing a thing yourself. There's only ask around, which is working throughout the neighborhood to get clues and insight on people. The only combat that you can get into, you either have some kind of hand weapon or a gun, and those moves are really deadly. So if you want to get in and mix it up, this is not the game that you want to be playing. This is a game where it assumes you've committed to do crime. Now, after the crime, what is the fallout and what are you doing about that? That took me, I'm still trying to make sure that I engage the moves at the right time, because I just have those natural reflexes from other games, those other expectations coming in. I'm like, oh, you want to sneak around? Oh, cool. Let's see. Nope, that's not how we do this. That's not how we do this. We are not going to have you act under fire, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that people can turn their heads and find ways to apply these moves, but I really, from my experience with the game, that's not where it wants the rules to engage. And that's cool. It's just different, and it's something I would warn someone about before they step into it.
It reminds me a little bit of Sagas of the Icelanders, which is another early Powered by the Apocalypse hack, which does specific things with moves that force you to sort of shift how you're viewing the game, saying, oh, I want to do this, but all of a sudden there's no structure there in place to do, the thing I would stereotypically do in a role-playing game.
Right. And it's a thing where, like, I don't want to lose these muscles that have built up. I don't want them to atrophy. So I really want to play some more Hood. We have one session left at the time of this recording. And it's great because we set up a heist, which this game is totally built to do something along those lines. In fact, the score, which is part of the director's playbook, or the director's edition of the game, the score is a sample kind of play set, which is absolutely a heist. So it's really interesting that we're going to tackle that. But I want to play some more in 2018. I'm just not sure how to work it into Star Wars yet, because I'm all Star Wars all the time.
So is it like Reservoir Dogs, where we have some scenes, we have them at the cafe, they talk to each other, blah, 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 and then suddenly we're after the heist where things have gone wrong?
Yep, that is a great way to frame it.
Okay.
It is a great way to frame it. It is... I came in expecting it to be Breaking Bad, and it's not that. It's a lot more Reservoir Dogs, but with the tone of Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels.
Yeah, that was the other movie I was thinking of in the context of this, particularly because I think the creator's British.
Mm-hmm. I think so, too. He does. He was on Plus One Forward, and he ran a snapping good demo of this game. Got me all excited about it coming in. And he's so natural with him that I didn't recognize that he was applying the moves at different parts of the fiction. It's good. It's really good. It's a good game. I know Phil Vecchione of Misdirected Mark is a huge fan of the Hood, and I'm a fan too. It's going to take me a little bit more before I feel completely comfortable with it, which is not a slight on the game. I'm just kind of slow sometimes. So that's me and the Hood. Lowell, what have you been up to?
Oh, well, we jumped fast there. Since last time, Pig Smoke, Worldwide Wrestling, lots of that. 13th Age, Godbound, action cards. Played a couple of sessions of Legends of the Wulin, 7th Sea Katai, Kuro, Monster Hearts. We did several sessions of Legacy, Life Among the Ruins, the second edition from the Kickstarter, and then Blades in the Dark. And usually I do focus on games that I've run for the Gauntlet, but Blades in the Dark is actually one of my face-to-face games. And I wanted to talk about it because we're 9 sessions in.
It's a long game.
Well, and no.
Not with this group.
It's interesting because I think we're maybe a quarter, maybe a third of the way through where I would picture the campaign arc. Certainly the players are there, and they're still at tier 1. They moved up from tier 0. So Blades in the Dark is a fantasy game of scoundrels, of a gang of... Scoundrels is probably the best way to put it. It is, of course, an homage to Lies of Locke Lamora and things like that, and has sort of a steampunk, very determined setting, very specific setting of Duskville. So I love it. And I was worried about it because the Kickstarter took a long time to deliver, but it really has delivered, at least for our group. For one thing, I think the rules are incredibly well written. Sherry and I feel the same way, that these are some of the best rules for learning the game, at least to the way that we read rules and the way that we approach it. It goes through and it provides the basic rules, and then it gives lots and lots of examples. And I think there are some just very basic conceits that once you've grokked those, it's pretty easy to work with. I've seen a lot of people say that they think the rules are way too complicated, that they're complex, but I actually don't think they are. I think they're seeing all of those examples and they're reading those as like rulings, like this is how it is. If this happens, this is what you should do, rather than what I think he's positioning it as is, this is a way to go at it. You could approach it this way. You could, given this situation, given this die result, this is how you might read it. And like a school workbook, at times he stops to go, okay, what would happen if we did it this way? And goes through those examples. And I really like that. I think it's a fun idea for the setting. And, some people don't like steampunk. but I do, and I've blinged the whole thing out at the table. I went and bought the big Duskville map, and I have that under a plexiglass on the table, and we mark on that. I bought coins from the Scythe board game, the like little metal coins, so I give that out when they get stuff. And they often have to spend money, so I got this little steampunk piggy bank. It's a steampunk skull, and so when they have to spend money, I make them put it in there so they hear the clink of it as they give their money away. So I really like that. I love the way it looks. One of the things I really appreciate about this game is, and particularly my play group, is they came in with a very strong idea for their group. Because you come up and you're a new gang. There are various different kinds of gangs. You could be assassins, you could be cultists, you could be thieves, or in this case, they're purveyors. And they said, hey, I think that we all used to be part of a traveling circus.
Nice.
And we've traveled around on steam trains all over the place, and we finally have settled down here. And that meant that one character, well, I used to be the sharpshooter, and I used to build the sets, and, that kind of thing. And they were able to choose that, and it gave them a reason why they were together before. It gave them some backstory that we've used, like they murdered the ringmaster. That's why the circus broke up. And they're the ringmaster's friends who are after them, and all of this kind of stuff. So it was a really nice thing that we were able to work into the fiction of the game and give us an angle in on it. I love all the little bits that the game has a lot of dials that I think you can tweak. I think I'm probably not nearly as lethal or as mean as some other people might be. I think that the game gives the GM and the players room to set the amount of pressure, because the more you roll, the more you're going to screw up, and the more you're going to have to pay the points for it. And I'm pretty light on the number of rolls that I do. And so that means they have pressure, but they're not terrified all the time, which they could be with a GM that was really hitting all of the buttons hard. There's a very, very funny bit, and this is just one last thing I really like, is they have like the typical friends and enemies on the character playbooks.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all very normal. Except you get to the one character that's the Whisper, the one that works with ghosts. And the friends and enemies on there are really horrific. And so our Whisper was like, oh, well, for my friend, I have this demon as my friend. And demons are really, really bad news in the setting. So she goes, okay, I'll write down demon as my friend. Okay, who do you want as your enemy, Chaz? Oh, how about Lord Skurlock? Okay, well, Lord Skurlock's like the vampire, aged lord of the city, so she made him her enemy, and that's been a delight for the kind of mess that the players can step in with that. So I love that little detail. That book is really, really dangerous for people who kind of aren't aware of the fiction. So there are some things I'm less enamored of about Blades in the Dark. I said that the book is really good for teaching. It's not so good at the table. When I go to look for something, I'm like, okay, we're at the end of session. I need to look up the experience stuff. I can't find it. It's 9 sessions, and every single time I cannot find it. And there are several other sections in the book that when I want to go for reference bits, I can't find them.
Is there an index?
There is I think there's an index at the back, but some stuff is referenced differently. So like when I go to advancement, then I have to cross-check a couple of things. There are multiple page numbers. And also, I'm a guy, so I can't ask for directions. So I just want to flip through the book to find the page. And that's a little thing. But I think it's a cost of doing business with the book being such a strong teaching game. The game is also really wants you to jump to the meta level a lot. There's one particular mechanic in the game where when you get into a situation and, like, let's say somebody attacks you, the GM, there's no role for the GM. The GM says, okay, this guy stabs you for 2 harm. That's just how the situation has fallen out. What the player can do then is roll to avoid those consequences. And it kind of, you have to stop, make the roll, spend some stress to do that, and kind of rewind that. That's a very meta approach to action that I think some people would not be good about. It's because it does require you to kind of step away from the sort of, I declare what I do and now we go and things move forward chronologically. It's also a mechanic that is not intuitive for my players. As I said, we're 9 sessions in and I still have to remind them to do that. Some of the players have it. I'll say, okay, and this guy comes over and he breaks your leg and Sherry goes, okay, I'm going to roll to avoid that consequence. And she'll roll to resist because she's got it down. And a couple of other players do. Like, okay, well, this guy spots you in the street. Some of the players, the other ones have to go, okay, Chaz, you can roll to resist that. Dave, you could roll to roll that back. And so I don't know if that's off of me teaching it or the way the game works, that's something that they're having a problem with. There are a few other little things, like the equipment section is very loose, and there's some stuff about how experience gets dealt out. I wish the game had more discussion of the lead up to the missions, and I want to stop and talk about this. So this is one of these new games that is very structured. For RPGs, like, okay, we do this phase, and then we do this phase, and then we do this phase. And it's not a question of initiative, but this is the play space we're in now. So in this game, there's figuring out what you want to do in terms of your operation, your caper, your heist. And you kind of figure that out. And at some point you get to, okay, I think we know how we're doing it. And you make a roll and we go to the mission and we play out that mission. And we kind of cut in medias res to the mission, but we do that. And when we're done with that, then we resolve a couple of things from the mission. And then we do downtime, which is a very specific set of actions you can do in that cycle of recovering from damage, of building stuff for the next heist, of advancing yourself, all of that. So very discrete. There's not a lot of discussion in the game book about all the other stuff. Like, what is the lead up to that mission planning? What is the stuff about just wandering around and talking with people? What's the stuff about character development? What's the thing about enriching that world? There's less of that. And I wish there was a little more discussion of those elements. And I think the players would like more. The problem being, in my case, that is I'm running for 6 players at the table.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Now, there's 6 players that have played together for years. They know each other. They're really good about playing together, but it does mean that everybody gets less attention than they might otherwise. So it does mean that I have to bear down on the mechanics a lot. I have to keep things spinning to move things along. I really like Blades in the Dark. I think it's a dynamite game. I think it's really cool, the way it structures play. I've seen some people talk about how hard it would be to adapt to other settings, and there are certain parts of it I think would be difficult, like the different organizations and the groups and things. But the real basics, I think you could work with. And Rich, I know you've played Blades in the Dark, and you weren't a big fan of it.
Caveat:
okay.
This is pre-release. This is playtest versions. This was early versions. But yeah, I want a point where I get to know the characters, their lives, what they want. I felt like everything was mechanized. Like, okay, and now we have to jump into this cycle, and now we do this part of the game, and now we go into downtime, and now we're going to cycle because of the downtime. You've gone into a vice, so now you are in Hawk, so you need some coins, so we need to go right back into another mission, and it's got some great ideas. But I didn't see where I got to talk in funny voices, so I don't care. Like, I don't want to play it. Based on what my experience was. I got the book. I got the big hardback book. At some point, I'm going to go back and I'm going to try to revisit it with fresh eyes. And you're convincing me that I've definitely, like, I'm kind of right, but maybe I'm kind of wrong about that.
Well, I'll tell you an interesting conversation I had with Kyle Thompson, who has done this video series on how to play Blades in the Dark. And he's in the Australia time zone, part of the Gauntlet. And he said he had watched John Harper run Blades in the Dark on videos, and that Harper really slowed things down. Like, he took a lot of time in that first session to just do character creation and talk story, and that as opposed to the way the game kind of looks on the page, he has it a lot more character building, a lot more character talking and things like that. And I need to go and watch those videos to see, because it may be that just because of my own positioning and maybe my desperation to grab onto mechanics to make the game work, that I'm doing it a disservice on that score.
Well, in 6 players, really, you have to obviate a bit of that and assume a bit of the chatty happening, right? That's what I've done when I ran for bigger groups is, you guys talk amongst yourselves while we do the game here, because we only have so much time.
Entertain yourselves in a corner.
Right. I like it. And I think it's worth playing. And I think here's the other thing is it has sustained itself at the same level of fun 9 sessions later. And I'm not like, okay, we need to wrap this up. I could do another 9, 10, 12 sessions easily with this.
Does the game surprise you?
Yeah, because I'm still able to play off the players' expectations, and they surprise me in what they want to go do and things like that. And there is a sense of kind of generating novel results from the rolls. It's not like GM moves where I go, okay, well, the fiction is leading me towards this result. But there is still some open stuff because the GM isn't rolling very much. The players are really making the rolls and the choices.
Okay. Lowell, did you have anything else you wanted to say about Blades in the Dark?
No, it's just all my program of reprogramming Rich on various games that I know he doesn't like, so I apologize for that.
It's okay. I'm sure other people have shared similar. I've heard this opinion from others.
Well, my understanding was the early version of Blades was very rough and not quite reflective of the final version.
The early version of Blades, the very, very, like when there was only one crew type, I think, that was golden. Because there were so many gaps in the rules that we just kind of went in and filled in the gaps. And then as all those gaps started getting filled in, and then there were gaps that weren't gaps got filled in, I'm like, holy crap, this is like a board game.
You just wanted ghost lines again.
Well, you said you guys came in on a bunch of trains. I wanted you to say you're going to do a prequel where they actually turned out they were bulls on the line, right?
Might have to do
that.
Or do a road trip session.
And then have them lead on a
great train robbery kind of thing.
Have them leave on a steamship.
Choo-choo.
Call the Owl.
No.
Just do all of it.
Well, it's the same world, right? Oh my God, spoilers.
Different timelines, but yes, it is. Awesome. Thank you, Lowell. Rach.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, what have you been up to?
A lot of stuff according to my list. So I've had things come up the past few months. This is my first roundup in a while. So my list, and this is probably incomplete, is I've been playing Urban Shadows, Ryotama, Swords Without Master. All of those were either Gauntlet games or Queen City Conquest games. Queen City Conquest was early September. Apocalypse World, another one of the Love in the Time of hacks of Archipelago 3. Mobile Frame Zero Firebrands. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, sort of. I ran an epic. I think that counts. Alastor the Awful Sea, Before the Storm, Aegon, Mission Accomplished, which was a playtest at Metatopia, and Legacy of the Slayer, which is the oddball game I'm going to talk about today. So Legacy of the Slayer is a GM-less, card-based RPG written by Jay Treat that was inspired by legacy games. This game dates back, or the version of this game on the market dates back to about 2014, which is when you would have seen Risk Legacy, predates Pandemic Legacy, but when this idea was being tossed around about a game that you would hack and modify as the story moved on. The character sheets in this game are little decks of cards where if you play it as Rin, you randomly draft your cards, so you figure out what your negative, neutral, and positive traits are. And even then, it's sort of ambivalent what that actually means, because you can have liabilities or abilities that kind of can be spun one way or another, but we'll get more into that in a minute. And then you build a deck by shuffling all the characters together, and then you stick in some plot twists and a plot resolution at the end. And then you pull off 3 cards, and those are your theme prompts, and then you go, and that's the whole game. It's the legacy component of it is that the deck is meant to be trashed. You're meant to write on it and cross off. I was playing this 2-player with Kate, so For example, Kate had a boyfriend card in her character's deck, and we were crossing them off as they were dying and writing in new ones. And I had dating as a hobby on my character's deck, and the same thing was happening over there because we're very bad people. So what worked for me in this weird, strange game? So the term I used to hear when I got into gaming was beer and pretzels as a way to refer to a very low-key, chill game that's sort of silly that you play with your friends. For this was a Perrier and sushi game because it was just something for Kate and I to play when Rob, my partner, was running Fallen Empires elsewhere. We're like, okay, well, we're not playing Fallen Empires drop-in. We're going to play this thing. So there was no prep. You just bring out the deck, or we would sort of put the deck on pause if we want to stop in the middle of the storyline. It was a very self-indulgent game because there's so much flexibility. So you're supposed to be playing Monster Slayers in Urban Fantasy World. We tweak the decks a little bit to tell the backstory of our Urban Shadows characters from last summer. So we're talking about, when they first met each other, and let's go build out the NPCs so you have NPC cards. I made a bunch of them based off of characters we already knew existed in the universe. So we were like, who do we want to see show up this session? Okay, we're going to grab their cards and throw them in. The card mechanic allows for a little bit of wiggle room in terms of what direction the story takes. It's not that dissimilar from a lot of prompt-based story games, something like Fall of Magic, where you're able to pick your location and what your prompt is. It's just that your prompt is now, well, this is my character's card, and they have prophecy as one of their supernatural abilities, so we're going to have a scene that's framed around that ability. Writing on the cards is fun. My deck for this game, we put them in little card protectors, and we're using dry erase markers. But there is a second deck we took to Gen Con, because Kay and I both bought a deck at Metatopia 2016, and that one we actually wrote directly on the cards. And the idea is you rip them up and throw them out as cards no longer matter to your character. Maybe your character evolves, and for example, one of my character's flaws is they're foreign, they're not from around here, and that causes issues because that foreign card comes up, and then we have to set a scene saying, what supernatural, cultural faux pas does my character commit, and how does that drive the story forward? Eventually, the intent was for my character to get a better sense of how the supernatural environment works, so I could pull it out of his deck and then put maybe another card in its place. And then you can add more cards saying, okay, you built a new contact, or, we revealed something about your family. They become part of the deck if there's something that you want to keep coming up in the story. So it's a very relaxed game, which it's very loose. And I thought it was funny, Rich, you were talking about there was all these holes in Blades of the Dark. There's a lot of holes in this game. This is technically an alpha. The version that exists, as I said, dates back to 2014. I don't think we're going to see a final version. I think it's a sort of what we have is what we have. It's not intended to be a two-player game. We're doing a lot of modifications to this game for it to be the two-player urban fantasy game that we want it to play, which is interesting to sort of, not that I'm a gaming snob, but when I got into gaming, it was towards the end of the D20 boom, and everyone had their own homebrew, and every podcast people were like talking about my homebrew, and it was very hard to penetrate that and understand what they were talking about and the changes they've made. This is kind of our story game, indie game homebrew that we're working on, sorry to say. So it does flow a little bit better with more players. We played a 4-player game over the course of Gen Con this summer, which was really neat because you could just grab the deck and just pick it up whenever you wanted to. 2 players, there's a lot of cards, and sometimes we'll put the cards out because you pull 3 cards at a time most of the time, and it'll be like all one character and be like, well, I guess this is what we're talking about now. Or sometimes the game will stall out. We'll be like, these prompts are boring, and we've gotten used to just being like, okay, discard these prompts. There's no resolution mechanic to the game. We're hacking in parts of Archipelago, so the game really wants you to basically set a scene and then have it end and resolve as nature would see fit, I suppose.
Wow.
You have, it's the bare bones of a game, and it's fascinating. So originally we started resolving conflicts by rolling 2d6 and justifying what our Urban Shadows play sheets would have. I'd be like, what stat would we use in this situation? So then we progressed to the Archipelago decks, which are lovely and beautiful, but Morningstar did not build it was Morningstar and the other guy whose name fleets me. They did not design these cards for an urban fantasy game. So it got to the point where we drafted a bunch of urban fantasy-ish archipelago prompts saying, and those prompts are usually perhaps or yes and yes but, no and no but. So instead of it being very vague like the archipelago cards were, now it's like very specific, saying very specifically urban fantasy, borrowing a lot from Urban Shadows. So yes, you could get out of this bad situation, but you're going to owe someone a big favor. Or no, you can't resolve this issue, but now the perfect escape route has been revealed to you. So this game is very dependent on emergent gameplay, and it's sort of hard to describe it as it's literally a deck you pull off, and every once in a while there's a plot twist, and like, we have to justify why the story changes right now. I have mixed feelings about emergent gameplay. I think it's really neat if you're with people who you can really read tone or their sense of character, their sense of story. So Kate and I know each other very well, and we're very good at it. But when I was a new gamer, I found emergent gameplay terrifying because I've struggled to read other players and read their cues. I'm like, I don't know. We're just going to flail around here for a while and see where a story presents itself. So we haven't had many issues, but I'd be really trepidatious about putting this game in front of someone who had never experienced a story game before or had never experienced a role-playing game before, because it's easy to say, oh, these lovely cards, they're your character, but it's so abstract. So I think I'm enjoying the game. We've put it on pause for a while. I think Kate and I actually have the genesis for our own little baby urban fantasy game, which might exist in a few years. It's a fascinating game if you want to pick it up just for if you're like me and I'm curious about games with weird form factors. This is a neat form factor. It's a little cardboard box full of all these cards, and they're cute, and it's neat, and it's very relaxed. But if you're looking for something deep or gritty, I don't think there's anything really there.
Interesting.
You saw us playing it at Gen Con, I think, Reg.
I did. Your reference to it as the Perrier and sushi game is very apt. I walked by and looked down, and they were just cards. I thought you guys were shuffling them. No, you were in the middle of a scene. You were role playing at the moment that I walked up. It was so casual, in the middle, like right outside of a coffee shop.
Yes.
Oh, you guys are gaming? I couldn't tell.
It's all theater of the mind. Yeah, there's a lot. It's funny because yes, there's a lot of wiggle room, but there's not a lot of meat there. I think there needs to be a little bit more meat for it to be. The game really wants to be a campaign game, but it's a half-finished alpha.
Now, you say that you guys have been hacking stuff on. I'm really curious about your process. Are you, like, you come into a thing, oh, well, we don't have a way to do so-and-so. Let's do it this way. Or do you say, well, we've normally been doing it in this manner. The book says this, let's do that, but we'll talk about it after the game. Like, when do you go in and hack?
The 2d6 thing happened on the fly because the game wants the person narrating to set stakes and the person who is playing their character to make an intelligent, justifiable choice. But then you're sitting there saying, these stakes are really grim, and I want to see my character succeed, and I could also appreciate them failing. I don't know if this is the right time. That's when the 2d6 thing came out. And that was, of course, us trying to remember what was on our playbooks. And the Archipelago cards came after Gen Con, because it was the first time Kate had played Archipelago, and she said, I want to see how these work with this game. Would this make it a little bit less flimsy than us trying to shove Powered by the Apocalypse back into the game? And we found they were a little loose because they're meant to be vague, because Archipelago is very vague in terms of how its situations come about and how you're setting scenes, because it's a lot of, you have people who are in charge of different parts of the world, and you're going, I don't know, person whose waters are, tell me about how the water flows here, like that level of abstraction. Mm-hmm. And then I think we had set some rules along the lines of, oh, this is something we know our character would be good at. They could pull 2 cards, and then you can make the choice about which one you go with. which could be a success, but if it's more interesting to fail right now, and if it's more inspiring to fail, go with that. And then that evolved into the custom deck, which I went and wrote out everything from the archipelago cards into a Google Doc, and we went and just sort of game jammed for an evening and came up with new prompts that rang a little bit less fantasy and a little bit more urban, and worked more. They felt more actionable. So things like, okay, if you could get out of this situation, you're going to take a nasty wound, or your reputation is going to be damaged, or this situation is unwinnable, but you gain a new ally who can help you. That will be the person who wins in this situation. Those things that were a little bit more tropey. And that came out of us using the archipelago cards and going, this was good, but after a session. So there was a lot of breaks in terms of we played it and going, well, this game doesn't quite do what we want it to do. So what do we do to make it do what we want it to do? And we weren't able to unlock everything because the game is sort of squishy, for lack of any better term, and very soft. We haven't been able to unlock the hard driving emotional spaces in there, and it might just require us to build our own game at that point, because this game is meant to be very relaxed, so it's not really having the player engage, making a hard choice, and considering the consequences and emotionally dealing with them.
Oh, cool. Well, is there anything else you want to say about Legacy of the Slayer, Rach?
No, it's like I said, it's fascinating. If you like quirky games, I like quirky games. That's why I bought it. It's worth maybe taking a look at, but I don't know if it's a keeper.
Well, let's take a break and come back with what's giving us life. It's giving me life. This is the part where we talk about something not necessarily related to RPGs that is lately inspiring us or filling us with joy. I'm going to lead off with something exciting for us. So Jacksonville last week got their very first IKEA store.
What?
Yeah. Now the closest one was in Orlando, which is a 2-hour plus drive. And going 2+ hours to get furniture and coming back, kind of lose out on the money you might save. So It opened on a Wednesday. My wife and I went to it on Friday after a lovely meal at Hood.Blades. And we said, hey, let's just cruise by the IKEA store. There were cones up and people with the little road flary signals directing traffic. It was like we were going to Disneyland because so many Jackson villains had decided they also wanted to try out this IKEA thing. I don't know if you guys have been to IKEA. It's delightful.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of IKEAs around Toronto.
It is also a maze.
Yeah.
It took us 15 minutes to leave, because there are tons of exit signs, but always to doors where the alarm will sound. You have to traverse the entire store, which is windy. There's no straight shot anywhere. And I love the way it's built like a museum. Like it reminded me of the museum in St. Paul, where you go in and they're like these little, here's a display of life in the 1800s. Here's a display of minimalist life now. It was so cool. And wandering from office space to living space to stuffed animals to here's our Swedish meatballs in our cafeteria. It was fascinating. And finally we get to the end, right? And it's like you've walked into a Home Depot in the back, because there's all these huge, gigantic stacks of things that you have to take home and build yourself, or pay us, $90 and we'll do it. But you also have to pay $70 for us to deliver it. So tack that on too. Woo. It's still neat. We have a short list of things. It was crazy. And like coming up and they give you a little golf pencil, like you're doing, putt, and you have a little thing and you write down all of the codes, and you can take
what part is the showroom?
Yeah.
And then you have to go to the back, or when you go near the end, now you got to, here's my 20-digit code for this. Oh, what color? Oh, I didn't write that down. Wow. It looked very stressful. looks like an all-day experience when we actually go to buy furniture. Luckily, we were just browsing.
Do you guys get the IKEA catalogs at all, or no?
Yeah, we get the IKEA catalogs. Because they're so overwhelmed, you can't, call ahead. You can't order online. You have to physically go in the store right now because they are literally swamped at all times. It was super busy and crazy.
What you need to do, though, is there's this bookshelf. It's when we bought ours, had a different name. It's got the little square cubby holes.
Mm-hmm.
That is the ultimate gaming bookshelf because the shelves are very short and it bears the weight of role-playing games very well.
Nice. We'll keep that in mind. Lowell, what is giving you life?
So, Sherry and I have been playing a metric shit ton of Diablo 3 on the PS4 because it's one of the few games that we can actually sit side by side and play. And it's been out for a long time, but they've added a bunch of new stuff and they've got these seasonal modes and things like that. And we love this game because it's so dumb. It's the most dude bro overwritten game ever. Everything is angsty and everything is dark. And, Diablo is the ultimate lord of death and destruction, and he's the prime evil, get it? And, all this stuff. And so we turn the volume down and then Sherry and I will do voices, where Diablo goes, well, I'm the lord of evil, but I'm really more of a vision guy, more of a planner kind of guy. And we have all these stories we tell ourselves about how the guy who's reading the lore stuff in his ancient voice, that he actually doesn't know anything. He's just making this shit up, and it's all wrong.
That's amazing.
So that's great.
I love it. And we've played hours and hours and hours and new characters, and we start over, and we go and get junk. And this is one of these cycles of things, and I love it.
Awesome. Rach, what is giving you life?
It's November, so I'm doing National Novel Writing Month. God help me, why? That is, for those who are familiar, when you try to write 50,000 words over the course of November. It makes like a novella by the end. It's been interesting. In the process of preparing for this, I have been reading up a lot on. I've been writing urban fantasy set in Iceland, but I've also been reading up about this archipelago. That's kind of jointly occupied by Norwegians and by the Russians. And the history of this place is this kind of bonkers and weird and strange. It involves all these moguls from the 1800s going up and trying to mine here for coal. And then there's this marble that might be cursed because you bring it up to the ground and it crumbles to dust. It's really weird, but it's been fun.
Neat. All right, well, that will bring us to a close for another episode of The Gauntlet. If you want to follow along, perhaps you even want to game with us, you can check out our Google Plus community, where we have a thriving number of games on the calendar. That is for the Gauntlet Hangouts. If you want to find out about new podcasts coming out or chat with the community writ large as a whole, you can find us on Google Plus under The Gauntlet. We also have a Patreon. If you are interested in sponsoring us or being a patron, we would appreciate it. That is completely optional. The podcasts are free of charge, but if you want to kick in a bit, we wouldn't mind it. And there are some really cool patron levels, including things like Codex, which is a fantastic zine that comes out every month. And we also have a Twitter account, which 2 or 3 tweets a week, so that's well worth it. Also, you can, if you want to watch some of our games, Rob Abrazato is lovely enough to post up on our Facebook community as well as our Google Plus the YouTube videos of games, mostly stuff run by Lowell and Jason Cordova, who was unable to join us for this recording. He has some work stuff. I guess that brings us to the end. Rach, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me back on.
Rach blogs at Thacos at Midnight from time to time, and she has a semi-annual podcast when she's not doing Breakout, which is never. It's called It's Like D&D.
I'm also on +1 Forward.
You are also my co-MC in Plus One Forward. My mental, this is Rach's stuff did not include that, but you are wonderful to be part of the second season and going forward. And then last but not least, we have the Emmy Award-winning Lowell from Age of Ravens, and also the not even semi-annual anymore. I think you pod-faded at this point, Plot.
Probably.
Really disappointing to me because Sherry's on that show.
I got to get Sherry on some Gauntlet podcasts. That's what I got to do.
Yeah, I think that's what we need to do is just get Sherry on some Gauntlet podcasts. Thank you very much, Lowell.
You're more than welcome, Rich.
Thank you,
It's obnoxious. Of course, you can't see it on the podcast, but on the video, you can see it over my shoulder.
I definitely saw it on the video.
Well, thank you very much, listeners, and have a good afternoon or evening based on your time zone.